Iraqi government forces are on the verge of reclaiming the last area of western Mosul from so-called Islamic State, after an 8-month offensive to drive the jihadist group from the city. Iraqi army forces, who cleared the eastern half of Mosul in January, have encircled fighters in a small pocket of the densely populated old city. Commanders say they expect to declare victory imminently. Hundreds of thousands of civilians have fled what was once Iraq's second-largest city since October. But the UN estimates that up to 20,000 civilians may still be trapped there, and warned that some are being used as human shields by IS. Thousands of Iraqi security forces, Kurdish Peshmerga fighters, Sunni Arab tribesmen and Shia militiamen, assisted by US-led coalition warplanes and military advisors, are involved in an offensive to recapture Mosul. The operation was launched on the 17th of October 2016 after the rapid advance of IS militants across Iraq and Syria in 2014. The offensive's progress was initially swift, with forces advancing from the north, south and east, seizing outlying towns and villages despite strong resistance. But progress slowed as troops entered the city limits, with snipers, suicide bombers and shellfire targeting them. The Iraqi government announced the full liberation of eastern Mosul in January 2017. But the west of the city presented a more difficult challenge, with its narrow, winding streets. According to analysis by IHS Conflict Monitor, IS fighters have lost a significant amount of territory since the regional offensive began. However, their losses slowed when Iraqi government forces met stiff resistance in the city of Mosul. But by the beginning of July, Iraqi forces had removed IS from all but a pocket of territory in the western half of Mosul, where militants are making their last stand. There may be only dozens of IS fighters holed up in the area on the banks of the Tigris, but the densely packed housing and narrow alleyways have enabled them to target the advancing troops with snipers and suicide bombs. Contradictory reports have made it difficult to track the progress of the government offensive on the ground. The maps shown here are based on expert analysis from two different sources, the Institute for the Study of War and IHS Conflict Monitor. Satellite images have revealed extensive damage to Mosul's infrastructure, buildings and archaeological sites, in particular to the city's airport and bridges. The jihadists constructed barricades across key routes and raised buildings so fighters could see the advancing troops. Most recently, the ancient Great Mosque of Al-Nuri, where its leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi demanded allegiance after declaring a caliphate, was blown up by IS, according to Iraqi forces. IS claims the mosque was destroyed in a U.S. air raid. Imagery, released by U.S. geopolitical intelligence company Stratfor in October 2016, showed how IS fighters sabotaged much of the city's airport, with wide trenches carved into it and rubble placed along their lengths. Imagery also revealed how the jihadists constructed multiple barricades across key routes into the city, including north of the airport. The barriers were made out of concrete blocks and other rubble, Stratfor's analysis said, possibly from the walls of destroyed buildings. Meanwhile, coalition airstrikes destroyed all bridges linking the east and west of the city across the Tigris River, with the aim of limiting the jihadists' ability to resupply or reinforce their positions in the east. In the center of the city, 4 of the 5 main bridges were put out of action in October and November by coalition airstrikes, with the aim of limiting the jihadists' ability to resupply or reinforce their positions in the east. The Old Bridge, the only remaining route open to vehicles in the center of the city, was then disabled in a U.S.-led coalition airstrike at the end of December. Stratfor images showed how the bridges were damaged. Al-Hurriya Bridge. A U.S. airstrike damaged the Al-Hurriya Bridge at the eastern end last October, but has then set up a barrier on the western side, shown below. Fourth Bridge. In November 2016, a U.S. airstrike damaged the Fourth Bridge, but was later rendered impassable by further damage, shown below. Iraqi military engineers installed a floating bridge across the Tigris River in May, after recapturing eastern Mosul, reconnecting the two halves of the city to facilitate troop deployments ahead of the final assault to dislodge. However, the UN estimates rebuilding the city's basic infrastructure will cost more than $1 billion. Reinstating water, sewage and electricity services, as well as reopening schools and hospitals, would cost more than twice initial estimates, the organization said. More than 800,000 people have currently fled their homes as a result of fighting in Mosul, according to the International Organization for Migration. Most have taken refuge in nearby camps and reception centers. Others have gone to stay with relatives and friends. Following the recapture of eastern Mosul in January, there was deep concern for thousands of people remaining in the west of the city, with food supplies reported to be very low and clean drinking water in short supply. The UN said in late January that almost half of all the casualties in Mosul were civilians. At least 2,463 have been killed and 1,661 injured across Nineveh province since October. UN human rights officials said in June that they had received credible reports of hundreds of civilians being shot dead by IS militants as they attempted to flee the fighting in western Mosul. Dozens more have reportedly died in Iraqi and US-led coalition airstrikes. The UN says many of those who have fled Mosul have witnessed the deaths of relatives, friends and neighbors and are suffering from psychological trauma.